Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So there are still many people joining us, but let's start. So hello, everyone. My name is Miriam. I work for the End FGM European Network, and I'm here on behalf of the Global Platform for Actions to End FGMC to welcome you all to our webinar. We are very happy to see so many of you join us today and still joining. Here are a few technical points to get us going. Please note that this webinar is recorded and that this recording may be shared publicly following this event. We also have closed caption available for those who would like it, and you can activate it through Zoom. Also note that throughout this webinar, you are invited to interact with the speakers through the chat box. Don't hesitate to put your comments there and ask questions there throughout the presentations and the panel. You can already invest this chat box by introducing yourself, by putting down your name, pronouns, country, and organization. And now, without further ado, I will now give the floor to our moderator for today, SEIO Director and Global Platform Member, Maria Taher.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this event. An emergency within an emergency, the crisis of climate change and female genital mutilation and cutting. I'm your host today, and my name is Maria Taher again, and I'm a co-founder of SEIO and the current US Executive Director. This event is organized by the Global Platform for Action to End FGMC, an international coalition that was born in 2019 at Women Deliver in Vancouver, Canada. That day, over 100 activists, experts, survivors, and civil society representatives got together and created a global call to action to end FGMC by 2030. Since then, nearly 950 organizations and individuals have signed on to support this call to action. We are gathered here today to discuss an important yet often overlooked topic, the consequences of climate change on gender-based violence, and most specifically on the prevention and response to female genital mutilation and cutting. Joining us from across the globe to discuss the issues are our speakers, Eva Kumba, Neha Wadekar, and Domtila Chasning. We will give our speakers a chance to introduce themselves and speak more about their work in just a bit, but if you would like to read their bios, we are including a link in the chat box. So if we could put that link in the chat box, that would be wonderful. And again, feel free as we are getting started to introduce yourself. I see people are already doing that in the chat box, and let us know where you're coming from. If we can get the PowerPoint slide on. So before we kick off, we want to also just make sure and acknowledge that FGMC is a sensitive and difficult topic to discuss. And we want to encourage anyone who might be feeling triggered by the topic or throughout the presentation or event today to really take care of yourselves, and feel free to leave the webinar if you need to. It really is important to prioritize your own well-being. So with that consideration, we'd like to start off our conversation by sharing a short video on FGMC and climate change created by the World Health Organization. So if we could play the video. The sound isn't coming through either. So sorry, the sound isn't coming through. Apologize, everyone.
Kenya's youngest Mashujaa.
Here we go.
I'm concerned about my name is Elian Ranjiku Klasim Gidai. I am 11 years old. I am East Africa's youngest climate change ambassador and Kenya's youngest Mashujaa. I'm concerned about climate change and the climate crisis because one, I chose to do this personally and I can't just stop halfway through the journey. I call it a climate crisis because one, the ice is melting, that's a crisis, that's a disaster. Two, there's too much drought. Vegetation is drying up. Basically, if you think about it, and if you go deep into it, you see that it's actually a crisis, not a change.
Mimi naitwa Mzee Philemon Olekerina. Zamani ulikuwa unaweza kutegemea mvua. Unaweza sema itanyesha wakati fulani na wakati fulani. Na kama ni kupanda shamba, utapanda kwa maana una hakika itanyesha. Lakini sasa hali ya anga imebadilika, hiyo hata huwezi fuata.
The climate change story that is really told is that women and girls are suffering because of FGM. This is when drought happens, cattle dies, a girl is circumcised and is sold off. And then the tribe gets the money and buys new cattle.
Wakati nilitahiriwa, ilikuwa asubuhi, kuna mama aliitwa, sikuambiwa, niliambiwa asubuhi ndio nisitoroke ama nisisikie hofu kidogo, but nilisikia ni kitu yenye nilikuwa nasikia ni mbaya, but si kwa uamuzi wangu. Na ilikuwa pia familia walikuwa wanasema hakuna kukaa wasichana kwa familia bila kutahiriwa.
Nikieleza umuhimu ama nikijaribu kuelewa vizuri umuhimu ya ukeketaji kwa jamii ya Kimasai, ni haina sababu kamili, haina kabisa. Kwa maana mimi binafsi sijapitisha watoto yangu kwenye ukeketaji. Inasemekana ama inajulikana, sisi tunasema kabla hujapitia ukeketaji wewe ni msichana tu, mtoto. Lakini ukishafanywa ukeketaji umekuwa bibi, mwanamke. Sasa unaweza olewa, na sana hiyo ndio umeleta sababu ya ukeketaji.
Right now we're in Kajiado County. Our aim here is 1, to plant about 50 trees. Number 2, to sensitize and raise awareness for an anti-FGM. I came here because I care about my world. I care about where I live. I care about what I breathe in. I don't want to see factories lined up, going all around, and that's all I see. Like, I'm trapped. I don't want to be breathing carbon dioxide and get breathing problems. I want to be breathing fresh, nice, cool air and be happy. Stand with a girl trying against FGM.
Great. So we wanted to start off with that video just to give a slight overview of what we'll be talking today about. I know the video was a little choppy, so we shared the link in the chat box in case you would like to view it on your own. And with that video, we would also like to turn it over to one of our guest speakers. If we could put the PowerPoint back on just for a second as well. So Eva is, our guest speaker, Eva, is here to discuss further this link between climate change and gender-based violence. And Ms. Evelyn Kumba works as a gender specialist with considerable years of experience working in Kenya, Africa, and Europe. Among her most notable contributions towards gender equality has been in eliminating female genital mutilation and early child marriage. For her efforts, Evelyn has been recognized as a champion in the quest for gender equality and awarded in Kenya. As an advocate for ending female genital mutilation or early child marriage, Evelyn is an established authority with numerous research and academic contributions. She has authored and co-authored anti-FGM articles for peer-reviewed journals, general circulation newspapers, and blogs. Welcome, Eva, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to this webinar. I quickly swing into the conversation, and I just want to begin by saying that the video has really provided us with a very good background regarding FGM and climate change. And I speak, and I am taking this webinar from Kajiado County in Kenya. I am a Kenyan and I live in Kajiado County, and the county is cosmopolitan, where the dominant community is the Maasai ethnic community, who have managed to maintain their traditions and customs. Now, just to provide the background of this research that we did, is to mention that between 2017 and 2018, I worked in the office of the governor of Kajiado County, and I was leading the co-creation and co-generation processes, bringing together private sector, civil society, government, and communities. In this position, I was coordinating the health, land, and gender and environment sectors. Part of the work entailed creating partnerships to respond to the challenges that were facing the community, including the priorities. And it is within this context that we reached out as a government to one of the banks within the private sector, and we were able to be the bank gave the county government a grant of $50,000 US dollars. I think 50,000 million USDs. That is around 50 million Kenya shillings. The grant was aimed at supporting the education and economic empowerment of the girl child and the boy child within the Kajiado County. And this entailed just revamping and creating programs and ensuring that girls are recruited in this TVET institution just for economic empowerment and reskilling. So what did we do with the grant? We created and designed an intervention to respond to the community economic empowerment through skilling of girls and boys. And it involved active recruitment of potential trainees with a bias towards girls. We received, after sending out the advert for recruitment, we received 1,000 applications, of whom, after further analysis, 7,000 applications came from boys, and 300 applications came from girls. But a further analysis showed that the Ma community girls that we had targeted had not showed enough interest. Only fewer girls had applied. Having fallen short of meeting the objective of getting the target beneficiaries from the Ma community, we changed the strategy and opted to go to the ground and directly recruit these girls. But it's during this recruitment process that our conversations or our findings were as follows. The ongoing drought, this period in which we were recruiting, there was an ongoing drought. But when we got to the ground, the ongoing drought had reached severe stage. And as a result of that, most families had migrated to the neighboring countries, taking boys and girls with them. Now, the target girls that we were looking for, the age bracket, was not available. Most of them had been married off. The others had been taken alongside the cattle for herding in the neighboring communities. The younger ones that are available were attending to their families, taking care of the children, the livestock that had remained behind, and the elderly. And additionally, those that were available had either to seek permissions from their husband, their mother-in-laws, or their guardians in order to participate in the project. Essentially, they were already married. And this brought us to the realization that within the community, our community, as long as a girl drops out of school, that marks the end of learning, formal learning. So any other opportunity that entails learning, they do not generally consider it suitable or worth pursuit. So these perspectives and reasons these perspectives provided reasons why we could not reach out to the target beneficiary. However, from a social science perspective, this demanded for a deeper investigation to understand this phenomena from both a feminist and gender and development lens. And good people, this now brings us to the point of where I want to just highlight the linkage between climate and gender-based violence. This linkage that resulted from the research that we undertook, just going to dig a deeper investigation to bring out the issues and an understanding, and also provide strategies of how to best respond to the situation that the drought had created. Number one, climate change creates a shift. If you may allow me, I'll share this slide. I can't see it. Excuse me. I can't see it. Sharing slide.
It looked like it was sharing your screen for a second.
Yes, thank you. Just to look at now the linkage between climate change and FGM is that climate change creates a shift in gender roles and practices in a way that climatic changes, whereas, for instance, in the past, herding animals was considered a male domain, the demand for labor has now shifted this norm, and girls are frequently asked to herd animals in addition to their traditional reproductive roles of taking care of siblings and the elderly, increasing the chances of dropping out of school, especially with prolonged drought and elements of flooding. Climate change is creating some levels of disempowerment that are predisposing girls to GBV. Girls are increasingly dropping out of schools. With little education, girls are less likely to access formal employment and other related opportunities. This increases chances of being married off. And if one finds a family that still believes in FGM, chances of being cut are always high. Increased demand for care work. The increased demands from climate change, the increased labor demands from climate change are contributing to child marriage. Families with elderly parents pay for dowry to be married, for girls to be married into those families so that they can provide labor, taking care of the elderly, cooking and cleaning, as well as families that are experiencing climate change are ensuring that girls are dropped out of schools or girls remain at home to also take care of their children and remaining livestock as other members of the family go out to look for water and pasture. So in this element of increased demand for care work, we are seeing it from two-dimensional. At the very family household level where the girl is coming from, she's needed for unpaid care work or care labor, and also families that are experiencing climate change and have increased demand for care are willing to pay for girls to be married into those families to provide this labor. There is also an element of decreased capacity for resilience and adaptation. This one was evident where we're seeing that the growing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, especially exacerbating the already diminished ability to cope with and recover from shocks. Extended periods of drought where families lose cattle jeopardizes their livelihood at household level. And this pushes families to continue cutting girls so that they are then married off with the option of restocking, or essentially leading us to the element of FGM for survival. Climate-induced migration. As girls and women are increasing required to travel long distances in search of water and food. In some instances, they cross the Kenya-Tanzania border in search of basic resources. And the Ma community in Kajiado shares in common language, certain practices and tradition with their Tanzanian counterparts. And in here, girls, while in search of water and food, are finding themselves crossing the border and therefore at risk of being, abused as they had. That's number one. Number two, here, as they engage, there's that element of intermarriages, and this influences elements of early marriage and FGM. The economic power balance. The economic power imbalance related to migration. As women migrate to herd and look for water, men are migrating in search of employment opportunities in urban areas. And when they get there and work, they come back with resources. They come back to the community with money that then is used to facilitate them to marry. So it is upon the man to decide what type of girl they want to marry. And because the resources in the community are diminished, these new resources create or exacerbate further the existing power imbalances and the quest for survival. Since the quest for survival is increased, then the community is left with no option. If the man demands that they want a girl that has been cut, they will be facilitated to access that. And therefore, the shift also in the gender roles, the shift in migrations, the shift in economic empowerment seems to be, according men more power compared to women. Then there is the element of increased solidarity within the community to preserve cultural practices that guarantee survival. So when you work in the community, during that period, when we went to the community, it was difficult for the community to say, yes, we are cutting for survival, but the approach the community has designed was that of silence. They would tell you whether they were not ready to say whether they are cutting for survival or not. But that solidarity in itself is so deep, and some leaders are willing to just keep it at that, maintain that silence because it guarantees survival. Then there is the element of the prioritization of GBV, as it's largely not seen as an emergency in the context of the climate change emergency. So therefore, the government and other actors are largely involved in prioritizing the actual response of providing food and water, and not really protecting the girl child or from the impacts of climate change. So what were the challenges that we incurred during this study? There was absolutely no data to back the arguments. We looked around for data that links climate change to FGM. It wasn't there. So the study heavily relied on the qualitative information to back it up. There were fewer resources. So therefore, there was fewer resources available globally that are able to support the element of the research work around FGM or JBV and linking it to climate change. There is the opportunities laid were that there is increased demand for research linking GBV and climate change in the context of policy and within different contexts. In this research study, we were looking at we went out to look at linking drought to climate change and GBV, but then there are other contexts where there is flooding, so there is need to look at how flooding exacerbates GBV or puts girls at risk of GBV. The other places are around, increasing temperatures, desertification, and all that. Then there is also availability of capacity to conduct this research as an opportunity. So good people, I beg to end it at that.
Thank you so much, Eva, for starting our conversation today. I know you have a lot more you can share, and hopefully you can do some of that during our panel discussion. I thought that was a very great just introduction into this topic. And we would like to transition to our panel. So I'd like to invite Neha and Domtila to also turn on your videos. And Eva, to turn your video on too, because we definitely want to continue to talk with you. And I have the pleasure of moderating this conversation, which will be followed by an audience Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. The Zoom feature, you should be able to see that. If not, then you can put it in the chat box, and we will hopefully be able to answer some of those questions at the end. But with that in mind, we wanted to start off our panel discussion, just really wanting to ask if you all could share a little bit more about your work. Eva, you have shared a little bit, anything else you might like to add? And really, how does it connect to the topic of our panel? And if we could start with Domitila, and then if we could go to Neha, and then Eva, if you have anything you'd like to add there, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, everyone. My name is Domitila Chesan. I'm an anti-FGM activist working at the community level, that's among the Pokot community, Kenya. I'm also the founding member of IF Foundation, a community-based organization that is advocating for the rights of girls and women in my community in relation to FGM, child marriages, abduction, among so many other forms of gender-based violences. We also advance the rights of girls and especially championing for the education of the most vulnerable girls in the community. So today I'm very privileged to be participating on this call together with other panelists to ensure that we are trying to explore the intersectionality between FGM and climate change. So I'm very ready to share knowledge and experience, especially as a grassroots campaigner working full-time and interacting with both victims and survivors of FGM who have been greatly impacted by climate change. So thank you so much.
Yeah, would you like to share a little bit about yourself and your work in connection to this topic?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Oh, I don't know what just happened. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. It's great to see so many people on the panel. My name is Neha Wadekar. I'm a journalist originally from the US, but I've been living and working in Kenya for the past 6 years. And I report across the African continent, but primarily focused in East Africa. And most of my work centers around women and girls, and I cover a variety of topics, everything from economic empowerment to gender-based violence, rape and sexual violence, abortion rights, and of course, the issues of child marriage and FGC, which are things that I think are very underrepresented in the media. It's very difficult often to get stories about women and girls into the media. It's particularly hard to get stories about women and girls living in Kenya or from disadvantaged communities in Kenya into the media. And it's really important that we tell these stories. So a couple of years ago, I worked on a project with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and we looked at the impact of climate change, specifically on women and girls in northern Kenya. And what we found from that, of course, were two primary outcomes: that climate change increases the rates of child marriage, and that, of course, by extension, it also increases the rates of female genital cutting. So that's what my work focused on. I got to be on the ground, interviewing women and girls, speaking with experts, visiting schools, talking to police, really getting a very well-rounded sense of what this looks like from every perspective. And the work that we did was published in Time Magazine in the US, Vice Media, and a couple of other places. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Neha. And Eva, is there anything else you would like to add on?
Just that I'm involved in a lot of capacity building work in Africa, in FGM, program design, data, and
oh, did it just freeze on us? I think Eva's video might have just frozen, but hopefully she can join us again. And then I think we'll just move on to our next question. And Domtila, I actually wanted to ask you if you might be able to, Eva laid a really great foundation around FGMC and the impacts of GBV. Could you perhaps go a little bit deeper into what you have seen and witnessed and experienced in terms of how climate change has impacted women and girls, specifically in regards to FGMC?
Thank you, Maria. Once again, like I said, I work with girls and women. I'm a frontline grassroots activist. So many a times I interact with girls on different occasions, whether it's rescuing girls or creating awareness at the community level. But in the recent past, it's become very evident that the effects or the impact of climate change is having an adverse effect on the lives of girls, especially the girls that we are working with, or the girls that we have rescued from their vices. So in the recent past, we have encountered a number of incidences where some of the girls that we've taken to school, having been taken out of school to undergo FGM and be married off. And when we went further to try to understand what were the root causes of this change in attitude and behavior, so it became clear that the impact of climate change is obviously making a lot of families to rely on the dowry that is coming from the girls. So this has pushed most families to change their decisions about their daughters, because we've done a number of engagements with the communities, trying to educate them to understand how damaging FGM is to the girls. But it gets to a point where with the drought and the prolonged rainfall, drought, so families have no options, or they have no choice but to resort to cutting their girls so that they can be married off. So I'll quote an incident that we had just recently, where two girls ran away from home after we had gone to their village to create awareness, and we've been working in this village for quite a while. And we had taken a number of girls from this village because, truth be said, most of these affected communities are the ones that are really marginalized, or the ones that are in the very, very remote places, which is also semi-arid, and they entirely depend on the livestock for survival. So what happens is that we have been trying to introduce alternative livelihood to the communities, but when the droughts become so prolonged, so the community have to resort to that final decision, which is to cut their girls. So we've been doing this work in one of the communities, and two girls ran away from home, and they came to us and they told us clearly that they didn't want to be cut because their cutting season was coming up. That was around last year, October. So we had to take the girls to a safe place. As we were also engaging with their families, we're trying to bargain with the families so that they do not cut the girls. But the sad realities were their justification of cutting these girls. We had to really beg. But one of the girls' mother called me and she told me, Domtila, listen, we have given you all the other girls because we've been requesting them to give us the girls to take these girls to school. So they were telling me that we have given you all the other girls. So why do you want to take the one that we have decided we are going to cut? And they don't see it as a bad thing. They see it as, a survival tactic. So this mother, her argument just stood out because she insisted and even threatened that she was going to commit suicide if I don't take back her daughter. She did, yes. She told me clearly that I have given you my other daughter, take to school, and that girl has never been to school before, and there is no way you can take her away from me. Like my life depends on that girl. You get? She is my firstborn daughter, and other my co-wives, the women who are married, the same man, have married off their daughters. So everybody else has animals, would have the livestock. So do you want me to be a laughing stock? You see? So it went on, and they threatened that if either I take back those girls or they were going to pull out all the girls they'd given me to take to school, and that is 36 girls. So I had to make a very tough decision whether I was going to give back the 2 girls to be cut, or I was going to keep the 36 girls that I was already supporting in school. So it went on and until it got to a point where they secretly sneaked into the school where we were hosting the girls, because sadly we don't have a rescue center around. So we normally partner with the boarding institutions. So sadly they sneaked into the school one of the weekends, and they took the girls away. And unfortunately, those girls were cut and they were married off. And now I was still able to go back to the community, and I'm still working with the same community, trying to now take the younger girls, because when a girl is above 13 years old or above 12 years old, it's very hard to rescue this girl, or very hard to convince the families to keep these girls or take these girls to school. So what we are doing is we are trying to advocate for the younger girls to be taken to school. And again, the community is also very disadvantaged because there are no schools in these places. So what has been happening is that every single term, I have to struggle to keep the girls behind in school, because otherwise, when they go home, some of them drop out of school, and it is for the sole purpose of, the reasons for that FGM and climate change is. So another example is we took some of the girls home during the holidays, because we have had a number of holidays in the recent past because of our changes in the education calendar this year. So we had a number of those girls dropping out and just go and look after the animals. So we're having a really rough time trying to convince and trying to debate, trying to bargain with the families, because they come to you with very, very strong reasons why they cannot keep their girls to school, because the men and the boys have had to move away from their homes to look after the animals, to look for greener pastures and water for their animals. So the girls have to look after either the camels or the goats, or to even look after their families. So for the older girls, it's even more it's more dangerous, because now they are nearing the cutting age or the cutting season. Like for this community, for example, we have parts of this community that is just preparing for the cutting season coming up in October, because now the rain has come and the families are back home. So those girls who are attained the age of cutting, that is puberty, so they are at risk of being cut. And the families are doing this for the sole purpose of survival, just because of the effects of climate change.
Thank you so much for sharing, Damitella, specific examples of really how we're seeing, and you had mentioned really being done for survival tactics or survival means, and Eva had mentioned really that the labor demands and also just care demands needed, and why or how that is impacting the increase of gender-based violence. And here we're seeing from your examples also how that impacts the increase of FGMC. So thank you for sharing those stories. I do want to shift a little bit and thinking about data collection and how do we look at collecting it? Eva, thank you. I'm so glad you were able to join again. I know you had started talking a little bit about data collection. So my next question is actually for both Neha and Eva. And I wanted to just understand a little bit, how are we learning about the impact of climate change? We're hearing these stories. Damitella has just shared some stories too. I know you both have been also have worked in communities and have heard stories as well too, but how is that data being collected? How can we make the case that we need to pay attention more to this intersection and provide programming that addresses that too? And what are the challenges and opportunities in collecting that type of data as well? Or then connected to that, how is information about the connection being disseminated? And Neha, maybe I'll start with you, and then Eva, if you could add on, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Thanks. It's a really good question. As journalists, one of the first things that we do look for is data, because often we have the opportunity, and it's really an amazing opportunity to go into communities, both like the other panelists have also done, and speak with women and girls who have experienced these, the sort of trauma of cutting firsthand. And so, we know that it's happening, but the question is, how much is it happening? How often? You know, who is being the most affected? Is it increasing or decreasing? And these are the kinds of questions that we generally ask as journalists when we're trying to write a story and bring that story to a wider audience who may not even know what FGC is. And, you know, it's one thing to say, okay, you know, I spoke to 3 women living in this part of Kenya, but it's very, very different. And in my opinion, it's far more impactful when we can say, I spoke to these 3 women living in this part of Kenya. And also we have all of this data to back that up, because it just makes a stronger argument. You have the anecdotes and you have the numbers, and it's very hard for people to argue against that. Obviously, the issue around collecting data, there's a number of issues. The biggest one is that this is a practice that, at least in Kenya and in many other parts of the world, is illegal. So it has been banned by governments. It is being you know, spoken against. There are organizations working to end it. There are activists in the field, like some of the ladies on this panel, who are trying to educate communities and to stop the practice because of the harmful health effects, and you know, the psychological effects and all of the other effects that we know are true. But then you get into a situation where people are hiding that they're doing it, but they're still doing it. And so it's really tough to get reliable data, because, you know, the only way, unfortunately, to know something this intimate and this personal is to see it yourself. And of course, that is not something that anyone collecting data is capable or interested in doing. So all of a sudden, you're trying to figure out, okay, if I ask a family if they've done this, you know, they're going to say, no, of course not, because they don't want you to know that they've broken the law. So how do we know? Which then puts people in this situation. Okay, we need to kind of get a sense of what are schools saying? What are teachers saying? What do the police statistics say? What do the hospital statistics say? Because a lot of women and girls, unfortunately, end up in hospital after this because of all of the dangers and complications associated with the procedure. And it's kind of cobbling together, from a journalist perspective, I mean, it's cobbling together these different sources of data to try to show a trend. You know, Kenya does have a demographic health survey that it conducts, and it's a pretty thorough survey that gives you all of this information about religion and about, you know, all of these other kind of religion, age, race, you know, all of these different health factors that are affecting the population. It's really comprehensive. But, you know, for things like child marriage and female genital cutting, you know, premarital sex, teenage pregnancy, these are things that are really, really sensitive in communities. And so we can't really rely on that data. And oftentimes that data isn't even available on such a wide scale. So what I did in my storytelling was I tried to put together a number of different data sources. I talked to UNFPA. I spoke with UNICEF as well, because they do child protection. So both of those organizations are working in the same space. I talked to the local police. I spoke with local activists who are keeping their own records and their own numbers of girls in their communities. They're an amazing source, and they're really able to give you more information than, you know, your regular government, you know, document would, because they intimately know what's going on the ground in their communities. And I tried to put all of that together to demonstrate that, look, in the last 5 years, climate change has gotten so much worse. Drought has gotten so much worse. Families are way more desperate. And look, we know that the numbers are going up because teachers are telling me that more girls have dropped out of school. They're seeing more of their girls coming back cut or not coming back at all. So it's a really tough, thing to tackle, to try to figure out how we can get data on this that's reliable and safe, and yet respects the boundaries of the communities that we are trying to work in and find more information out about. So I just think it's a great question. It's a great challenge, and something that we need to keep working on, because without data, you know, we're lacking a really important component of creating solutions to fight against this.
Thank you so much, Neha. Yeah, I definitely agree with you without data. I think it's also data helps make the case for funding to be able to provide services, prevention, support as well. So that data
Totally
is just storytelling in a different way as well. Eva, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
it's really very difficult, but I wouldn't say you wouldn't directly go out to collect data on the FGMC. You have to integrate it into certain other components that you're looking out for. For instance, climate change, food and cash assistance and something else, so that it leads you there. I'm looking at types of data. We have two types of data in the Kenyan context, for example. We have official data and we have unofficial data. Recently, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics developed a criteria for adoption of citizen-generated data. Citizen-generated data is any data that is generated by anybody who's not authorized to provide official data. So we have a criteria. But my starting point would be like, are we able to come up with indicators, proxy indicators, while collecting the DHS data, Kenya Demographic Health, whatever survey data on FGM? Can we come up with proxy indicators that then provided some data that can lead us to, can give an indication of what's happening, not directly, but somehow indirectly? Number two, do we have aspects of having the ability to corroborate or find alternative places where we can get this data? In Kajiado County, for instance, when we went to the community and we were asking, do you still cut girls? They were telling us no. But when we went to the hospital, referral hospital, most of our resources were being spent on cesarean section. And the youngest of the youngest were 80-year-olds to 15-year-olds. When you take this data to the policymakers, they are able to now look at it seriously. But there are also still elements of not believing the data because, the efforts have been here, the government doesn't want to be bad, community doesn't want to be further victimized. So it's a pretty delicate situation, but I think there is opportunity for more research, and there is opportunity for developing indicators and creating linkages here and there that can get us to where we want to arrive at.
Thank you for that. I was thinking about linkages and data and how do you corroborate data too. And my next question is also just thinking about those linkages. Do you suspect that there have been subsidiary effects of climate change, such as climate migration, and how that has impacted the FGMC as well too? Or have you heard stories of how climate migration might have impacted FGMC?
Yes. Related to our environment, there has been reports of emergence of FGM in other communities. And when the practicing community moves into the non-practicing communities, there is decreased surveillance. And the knowledge levels and awareness of the non-practice community regarding this practice are very low. So with that lack of surveillance and all that, it provides a condition that can allow for, that has allowed for FGM to be practiced. I'll give an example of cross-county FGM between the Kamba border and the Tharaka-Nithi, where we had Kikuyus crossing over to Kamba to come and cut their girls in the pretext of grazing, looking for water, and also that element of intermarriages, the migration, cross-border migration that allows for intermarriage. In Kenya, for instance, the Tanzania side, the law enforcement is not as very serious as the one we have in Kenya, so it provides that condition. The other element is just also around migration in search for labor. When men come back to the cities to look for income, they go back to the community, they have more economic power, so they can choose who to marry. And the argument is always that men marry down. They look for the naive, the most disempowered woman to have power over, to control. The other element is that in some sections, like in Africa, we have designated hotspots. Some regions are not hotspots. Like for instance, Nairobi remains not a hotspot as indicated. So the efforts around ending FGM are not really very coordinated or very serious within the city. But we see cross-border, Somalis come here to cut their girls in Eastleigh, and we see, and that migration is just not to cut girls. They come here to trade. They come here to live, to intermarry. So it's a whole, it's multidimensional, and I'm writing a paper on that, and it will be out, I think, by December, and it will be able to highlight a few issues, the linkage between migration and FGM.
We'll definitely want to read that paper.
Maybe just to add, the last key one is that our communities are very socialist within the rural areas. So they check on each other, the surveillance, it's easy to spot. Domtila is there, very fierce activist. She's always on the lookout. But when you migrate to the urban areas, we are very individualistic. We are striving for privacy. So whatever you do in your household is nobody's business. So that also creates a very fertile environment for, the very elite of the elite, those. Yeah. They bring in their girls to live in Nairobi, and you can circumcise them and nobody knows and nobody cares.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about that as well too. So I would like to ask one more question for all of our speakers before we go to audience Q&A. And we've talked about what it actually looks like, the intersection of FGMC and climate change. We've talked about how to collect data on this. I am kind of wondering if in all of your experiences, what are some of the ways communities and advocates have been working or could be working to really address that intersection in that work? What are possible solutions or ways that we should be looking to try to be able to address that if there isn't any solutions at this point in time too? And then also just related to that, is there anything at a systems level, policy-wise, that we should be looking at? Or any examples of policy that you feel have been helpful that we could look at as an example in other countries? And I'd like to open that up to everybody. And maybe Domtila, if you're available and if there's anything you would like to share, you could start us off.
Yes, obviously. Thank you, Maria. I would like to share a few examples of how grassroots activists are working extra hard to make sure that we are providing solutions for what we're just discussing. So, and before I say that, I just wanted to also mention that if there are efforts that are greatly undermined, is for people like myself, the frontline activists, who are obviously sacrifice so much of their time to try to mitigate some of these issues that we are trying to discuss today. And this is because now with climate change, it means the work has doubled up. So we also have to double up our efforts. So with close to zero resources. So, but all the same, because we are also passionate and we are committed to support the girls from our communities. So we are continuing to make sure that we are providing solutions, however small our efforts are, but it's being fed at the community level, because we are it's not like we are here today, tomorrow we are gone. It's a sustainable kind of solution that we are trying to provide. So part of what we are doing as organizations and grassroots activists working at the different communities that are also affected by climate change, we are making sure that we are up to date with what is going on at the community levels. So what we have done is to try to empower or strengthen community agencies by providing tools and skills, knowledge to community members, both men and women, and capacity building them to be on the lookout or to continue supporting the initiative that we have already set in place. So we have a number of groups or local agencies in every locality where we work or where we consider hotspot, so that these people can be always on standby whenever there are incidences of FGM or whenever there's suspicion that FGM may be taking place. So because they are in the same community or in the same villages, they'll always be informed of what might be happening. So we have those kind of organizations or structures at the community levels, so that it's not just Domtila speaking from Kapenguria and Domtila, shouting at the rooftop, trying to call out on every member of the community, but we're also having like a movement even at the community levels. And besides this, what we are also doing is to make sure that we are introducing alternative livelihoods. And I talked about this during my introduction when I say that the community, the pastoralist communities, especially rely on livestock for survival. So what we are trying to do is to make sure that we are having an alternative livelihood for the women, especially, so that they do not have to be in a point where they pull their girls out of school just for the purposes of surviving. So we introduce what we call bead making for the women in the communities, and some other women have also taken up some small scale businesses. So we are providing them with some seed grants so that they are also able to become self-reliant. Because we believe that when a woman is empowered, they will at least at one point be able to say no to their daughters being cut. And what we've also done is we're trying to strengthen the relationship between the daughters and the fathers, because we know that the men, they call the shots. So we try to strengthen the relationship between the fathers and the daughters so that they can also understand that, what they're trying to subject their daughters to is having, is detrimental to the health of these girls. So besides that, we are also trying to rally behind the community to not only come up with measures that are going to mitigate all these effects of climate change, but also trying to come up with measures that are going to ensure that their children are protected. Because if we are able to empower the community to take up the responsibility to protect their daughters from harm, and by so doing, we are able to even protect, more girls than what we could do by doing it by ourselves. So what we have done, again, as an organization, we've also set up what we call Shepherd School with the support from one of our donors, the Too Young to Wed. Shepherd School is kind of an informal school where girls who are disadvantaged or girls who are past 12-year-old, 13-year-old, who might not be accepted to be enrolled in the mainstream school. So we've come up with something that is called Shepherd School, where girls can look after the animals during the day and come back in the evening and study basic literacy, numeracy. They're able to write their names, they're able to read, they're able to count, and also we provide them with financial skills. So that is something that we are trying to introduce to make sure that we are not only asking the communities to stop cutting their girls, but also providing alternative solutions. And finally, we are also being conducting very robust campaign on education for the girl. Because for my community, for instance, the moment a girl has gone to school and they progress to maybe the upper class or the secondary school level, it's very difficult for this girl to go back and fall back to be a victim of FGM. So we are really working extremely hard to make sure that we are keeping girls in school, especially during the holidays, because we understand the timings and we know the seasons where FGM might be happening. So we keep the girls behind so that they are not also vulnerable or exposed to FGM. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those. I love the initiatives that you all are starting to or have started. Eva and Neha, do either one of you, would you like to add on? We only have a couple more minutes before we want to transition to audience Q&A, but
yes.
Yeah.
Just to mention that after the research, we made some recommendations, actual program and policy recommendations, and placed them before the governor. One of the recommendations was that the government introduces conditional, what do we call it? Conditional child protection, where the government, while responding to the drought situation by providing food and water, it is made conditional. It is in the condition that once you receive this food, water, and the girl is not married, the girl is not cut. But there were new challenges that were emerging from that. How do you prove it? The other bit was, changes in policy, because we really have standalone policy. The FGM policy does not recognize issues of climate change, and climate change policies don't recognize the issues of FGM and the linkages between FGM and climate change. So we have sort of gaps that need to be filled at both levels, at state, federal or county or national government level. Then there's increasingly low levels of awareness of the linkages and how to respond to them among stakeholders in government and outside government. So there is need to conduct more research and provide evidence, and also use that research to create awareness among stakeholders. The research that we did linked, climate change, especially the element of drought to FGM. But we are seeing regions like where Dontila comes from, like Baringo, there's been a lot of flooding, and the flooding has destroyed all the education infrastructure, leading girls and boys to remain at home for a long time, and therefore risk, never going back to school, early marriages and FGM, and even just further forms of GBV such as child labor and all that. So the shift right now, I would say, when we were doing this paper, it was the first paper to be published globally. And we looked at it as an emerging issue in 2020. But right now, it's no longer an emerging issue. It's the issues that is here with us. And we need new evidence to show us where are we at with this issue. And it cannot be one paper. We need a series of papers with more knowledge out there.
Thank you. Neha, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that was really, really thorough. I would just say, I think a big component or an important part of this also is to continue to get people to better understand the connection between climate and gender, particularly FGC, getting that out in the mainstream, beyond the world of like so many people on this call are so familiar with this topic, care passionately about this topic, but for, your random person and in a country that may not be as familiar or may not be as exposed to the issues around FGC, just making sure that we keep getting, data, stories and efforts and initiatives that people are taking to try to curb FGC, get those stories out there through whether it's the media, the press, social media, whatever it is, to make sure that this stays in the public consciousness. I think that's the only thing I'd add.
Thank you. All right, so we would like to turn to audience questions for a few minutes. We have about 12 minutes left. And looking at some of these questions, thank you to folks who have submitted some questions. I wanted to just ask one of the broader questions what somebody had was really how can they volunteer to defend women's rights against female genital cutting or mutilation. So broadly speaking, what are recommendations you all might have on how to get involved in this movement, how to support organizations, advocates, research, awareness raising? Any thoughts on that?
Can I respond?
Sure.
Yeah, there are a number of youth networks or feminist movements in Africa. And one of them is, for instance, in Kenya, we have the National Anti-FGM Youth Network, of which the CEO for ORCID, Asnath, and myself are founders, and we'll be willing to provide additional details on how to become a member. There's also the Africa Regional Network, the organization called FemNet, if she's based in Africa. She can join and be a member and at Africa level. I am aware that there are efforts by ORCID, Asnath and her team, to expand the national youth network to have membership from Africa and Asia, and I think that will also provide an opportunity to interact with other youth or young women who are working to end the harmful traditional practices in Africa and Asia. So there are a number of opportunities, and I think she can reach out separately, and we can provide those spaces and pointers.
Yes, I definitely agree with that too. There are networks around the world too. There's an Asia network on FGMC too. There's also a European network. There's a Canada, US network, but there are many organizations and advocates out there. So, definitely do some internet research. We can also try to point you to any resources, maybe in a post email after this event too. So I did, unless anyone else, Eva or Domitila, sorry, Neha or Domitila, you have something to add there. I wanted to ask another question. This one though is specifically for Domitila. So we had an advocate or who's on the call who asked about how do you work to sustain your program, and really also is the community agreeing to collectively own the initiatives that you're working on? So is there community buy-in in the programs that you have started?
Yeah, Maria, I think it would be very unfair to look at FGM as a standalone issue, because there are other issues that are cross-cutting. For example, you cannot speak about ending FGM if you cannot provide education for the girl. You cannot speak about ending FGM if you're not going to look at also the impact the climate change is having on the communities. So we cannot speak about ending FGM if we are not going to ensure that institutions like schools are also readily available at the community level, and women and men are equally empowered to also explore other opportunities in life, rather than just relying on livestock and cattle, which are currently also being at very high risk. So for me, I feel like for us to be able to sustain this campaign and achieve the ultimate goal of eradicating FGM, child marriages, and other related gender-based violences, there's need to address it together or alongside the other interlinked issues, just like we're talking about climate change today. Because I mentioned earlier on that the work has doubled up for people like myself. And this is also having a great impact even on our mental health, because now you have to think not only about the work that you are doing, but the work that is also emerging just because of climate change. So the solution that needs to be provided needs to be community-informed solutions and community workable solutions that are not only informed by the community, but also sustainable. And it will also speak to climate change related measures, because right now I feel like the conversation on climate change is partly at the urban platforms or urban levels, but the people who are affected by climate change are the people mostly at the community level or the grassroots level. So there's need to shift even the conversation as well, not just about FGM, but also about climate change measures and mitigations to the community level. People need to be aware or to be engaged, to be sensitized, to understand that they also have a role to play in making sure that we are also putting measures in place to protect the girls and also our environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Domitilla. Anything else to add to that question? Okay. So another question we had was actually around policy specifically. And are there any examples or are there gaps in policy in terms of how you address FGMC and climate change? Any thoughts, Eva or Neha? Neha, I see you went off mute.
Yeah, I think one of the things that had come up in earlier discussions that we've had as a group is around emergency funding and the way that emergency funding is kind of directed and funneled. I know we talked about this briefly earlier, but you know, when something happens like a drought in the north, it's so important to make sure that we have emergency funding that is kind of gender specific and that looks at the needs of the most vulnerable people in the communities. So when thinking about gaps in policy, it's, you know, moments like this where government might be considering an emergency cash transfer program or might be considering a response to an emergency like a drought or like floods or any of the other major issues that we could see that would impact economic well-being of families and by extension impact the well-being of the girl child. That's something where I think there are significant gaps that could be addressed. And you know, I think also like the more women, personally, I think the more women who are involved in shaping and crafting those policies, personally, I think that there will be more attention paid and should be more attention paid to what is necessary for the girl child. You know, not having women play a significant role in shaping that kind of policy then leads us to policies that are skewed or that don't take gender into account at all. And as we know, that just simply doesn't work. So that's, a really key part of making sure that we put in good policies in place and fill in these gaps, is to make sure there are more women actually doing the work of policy making.
Right, definitely agree with you there. Eva, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, challenges, I would say policies are only as effective as they are funded. The challenge I had with while working in the office of the governor is that, yes, we had a policy, but the funding came in too late, such that as you respond, the damage has already been done. The girls have dropped out of school, some already pregnant. So then it calls for also an additional aspect of changing related policies. For instance, the policy on education in the pastoral areas does, or other FGM practicing communities, does not really need to emphasize on qualification. It should just look at interest. Is the girl interested in going to school? Not did the girl get to university or college, because then it is based on understanding the barriers and challenges, the structural barriers and challenges that exist within this community. So the policies should be sort of timely, supported by timely budgets, that then when the budgets come in, they're able to sort of protect the family from making some very, I call them dangerous decisions. Decisions around survival are very dangerous. You have no choice. You have to live or die. So the timely funding of the policies, the policies, or rather the practice, should also be conditional as we respond to the elements of, as she said, food and cash assistance. What are we pegging it on? We provide food and cash, and then when we go back, the very girl has been exchanged for livestock. So I'm talking about now conditional social protection. We need conditional social protection policies that safeguard the girl child, and additional to the boy child, and allow for children to just be children, and also sort of the current economic empowerment policies, for instance, should also acknowledge that the resilience we talk about is no longer in existence. Families, households have been overstretched. We have communities that have suffered triple pandemics, like in Samburu, where we had the locust invasion, we had the COVID invasion, and now we are seeing, a drought that has been persistent for 3 years. So what are we talking about? You're talking about designing social protection, or rather response mechanisms that are also prolonged to allow the community to recover and probably resume or increase adaptation in a way. I think, Maria, I'll beg to leave it at that. There's a lot more I could say.
No, I know. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Thank you, though, Eva, for sharing. And thank you to Neha and Damtila for also being part of our event today. I'm so sorry we can't get to all of the audience questions, but hopefully this is a starting discussion and something that we can continue and really make a recognition of how important it is to do work and understand the connection between climate change and FGMC. So thank you all again for joining. Before we leave, we do want to just mention that this event was recorded, so we'll be sending the recording to everybody who registered. And also, in the meantime, to support our advocacy on FGMC, this is one way you can support by clicking the link in the chat box and signing the call to action that the Global Platform for Action had created in 2019. And we would love to get more support on that as well. And then if you could just go to the next slide really quickly. We'll also send this PowerPoint out to everybody so that you have a link to it. But here are some of the articles that we've shared in the chat box throughout the presentation, and some of the research that our speakers have been involved in, and articles that they've published too around climate change and FGMC. So we wanted to make sure that you all had links to that. And again, we'll send that around so you don't have to frantically be copying down the URLs right now. But thank you, everybody, again for joining us, and hope you have a good rest of your day, night, wherever you are located in the world. But thank you. Bye, everyone.